go ahead and hand it off to Tracie to introduce the cast that's with us because she does a great job at it.
Yeah, so it's my absolute honor to introduce Barbie Ferreira, who's our Louis Trevino. And our Bob Trevino, Mr. John Leguizamo.
Oh, wait. No, but what?
It's all good.
Sorry, guys.
Kind of warm in
We
here.
got a lot of phones out.
So cozy.
Hi, everybody. Hi. Please post on the internet. Tell your friends.
Bienvenidos.
Yay.
Gracias, gracias.
So I'm going to start off with a few questions I have prepared, and then if we have time, we'll open it up at the end. So think as we talk. So the first question I wanted to dive into was with you, Tracie. I think a lot of people in the room know that this is inspired by your personal experience. And I was curious how long you've been wanting to tell this story on screen, if there was something specific that inspired it or it's been ruminating with you for a while.
A little bit of both. You know, around 2021, when my Facebook dad, my Facebook Bob, was still alive, I got this urge to write this story, and I wrote a very cheesy version of the script where they all became a family, and I was going to give it to him as a present because I don't know how else to express myself. You know, this is how, you know, we're writers. This is what we do. So I wrote this cheesy short version, and I went to his Facebook page, and that's when I saw his wife Terry, his widow Terry, had posted that he had passed away. And I'd had years to tell him what he meant to me, and I had tried other avenues and it didn't really work out. So I was just consumed with regret. You know, I was like, I had all that time. I had all that time and I never told him. So I got to work rewriting it, and I did do a longer version first. My friend Barbara Stupansky, who's a wonderful writer, she and I read each other's stuff all the time. And I said, what do you think? She said, Tracie, it's great, but you know he has to die. And I was like, no, Barbara, no. You know, and she's like, you know it. And I'm like, fine, you're right, and I don't want to do it. So I stayed in my apartment for like 3 days and cried, and that's when I rewrote it. And that next draft was the one that really started affecting people. It was the most truthful I could have been, you know, about what he meant to me and what it's like to go on without somebody you love, you know.
And I did want to talk about the ending because even just with context clues, you can tell that you had much more time with him than Lily gets in the film. And, you know, without asking explain to us this choice kind of question, I guess that sort of swift ending and that short amount of time they had together, were there certain like insights that allowed you to bring to the film?
Well, it is inspired by, not based on, so I took a lot of creative liberties. It's also kind of a combination of a mentor and friend named Bob Trevino in Texas. I'm from Texas, and I knew I had to change the name legally, and so I thought, well, I want it to be authentic. I need it to feel real, and I need that heart in this film. So Bob Trevino had always been so kind to me, and his wife had always been so kind, so I called him up. I said, Bob, I have a really weird question, you know? I said, I need to rewrite this, and I think if I use your name, I can do what I need to do with it, because it's that kind of heart. And he said yes. So it was just a combination of things. You know, I hope that answers it. But
And he worked on the movie.
yeah, he did. He was special
Special
effects. So people say, is that a metaphor? Like they're kind of thrown by that, you know.
And going to Barbie and John, you both are very busy. You have a lot of projects. And the fact that you executive produced the film says something. I guess, were there specific elements that compelled you to be involved on that level?
Well, I love indie film. Indie film is my favorite genre of filmmaking. It's what I got into the business to be in. It brings me the most joy. I mean, I like getting paid too by big commercial movies. I like a big check too, but it doesn't fill my soul. It never really makes me feel like an artist. Like when I read Tracie's movie, it was so beautiful, so character driven. Because you know, indie films is where the experimentation happens. It's where innovation happens, because you can take more risks. And here there was this beautiful story that was so authentic, so moving, and just captures real life the way we experience it. And she doesn't pull punches. She just goes for every emotion. He's not afraid of any emotion. And I found that so raw and so beautiful that I wanted to be a part of it.
Yeah, and this is my first time producing, and I'm so happy that you guys trusted me with this. It was so sweet. I got the script like as it was a little baby. Like we didn't have any dates. We didn't have the Bob Trevinos. We didn't have anything. So Tracie and I really started kind of building this character from even just like the dream of possibly making this film one day. And we actually did it, you know, which was, it's so cool because you never really, you know, you always have the dreams of like doing your passion project, and of course money comes in, and then it's like a whole thing, because obviously money does not grow on trees, especially in the film industry. So I mean, Tracie's entire commitment to getting this budget so that she could tell her story the way that she wants to is so inspiring to me. Hey, I see friends in the audience. So I was like, so to me it was just like so inspiring, and I was like, this would be amazing to, you know, do my first producing project with people who really care about what we're putting out, and that's like the most important thing to me, regardless of all sorts of things. And John, I also agree. I love a big check, but you know, it's not quite. You know, with acting, it means so much when you work with people who really want to be there every day, and it's not about the money. It's not about anything. It's just about telling the story truthfully. So it just was a wonderful experience. I can't believe we're here.
And Barbie really hung in. You know, it took a while to get it all together, and she was with it the whole time.
I always had in my mind's eye that we were going to shoot this, like no matter what. Everyone's like, you know, it's an indie, we don't have the financing yet. I'm like, in my mind's eye, I see it.
Yeah,
So
absolutely.
And it was incredible. It was not easy. It was short.
No.
It's a few days. She had to be so prepared, so precise. The strike hit right when we were about to shoot. So she went through a lot, and she fought through it all, and was always gracious and kind, never snapped at anybody. It was incredible to watch you work.
Thank you so much.
There's a lot actually in those few answers I want to come back to, but something I was going to ask about at the end, but now seems like a good time. Being an indie film, are there any specific anecdotes from filming or the creation process that can like illuminate for us how difficult that can be and shape a film also?
Well, we do have our producer Sean Mullen back there too. I was just going to talk about the strike happening on day one, and
Day one.
Day one of shooting. You know, we had planned to fly them out, you know, knowing when the strike would happen, but then SAG pushed 2 weeks. I don't know if you remember that, but SAG pushed 2 weeks, and we were so little. We were like, we can't afford not to keep going. We actually have to keep going. So we did it, and I remember I would step out I was shot listing with my amazing DP John Rosario, and Sean's hair would be sticking up and like all kinds of crazy. I was like, were you just going like this and let go because your hair is, you know? So we knew that it might strike. We had this beautiful first day of shooting, and I feel like we really bonded. We had already had rehearsal, which was incredible. We were shooting your scenes on day one. And I feel like, and I had my late dad's Kermit the Frog, and it was like a real team. It was like why you make movies, like John was saying, right? So the strike happened, you know? We lost the second day, which is just devastating to an indie film to lose a day. You know, time is everything. So, and I remember we said we were so transparent. We were like, this is the situation, everybody. We're gonna meet at lunch. We're trying to get the waiver. You know, obviously we respect SAG. Obviously they were not shooting. But I remember looking out at lunch, and the whole crew was like, what, put me in, coach. I used to play sports, you know, I'm looking at all the tables, and they're like, put me in, what do you need, what's going on, I'm in, you know, and I think, you know, you cast the cast, but you also cast the crew. And I had done a lot of interviews before I picked every department head and every person that we hired. And I feel like at that moment, I was like, we really have a team, you know, we really, really do, from everybody. Every single person on that set was irreplaceable.
Well, Tracie's meticulous about who she works with. She does not mess around, right, Sean?
No, I have a good story about that.
She doesn't compromise, and I love that, because a lot of people start to compromise, and all of a sudden things don't turn out the way you really intended them to.
And following up on that, because I do have a good example of how selective you are, but I'm interested, John, you know, working on a film like this with like multiple emerging talents, what do emerging talents bring to a film that you don't get to experience on other projects?
Oh, well, emerging talents like Barbie and Tracie.
That's right, John. What's up?
I'm on the spot. No. They bring passion, they bring joy, they bring freshness. They're not jaded, they're not thinking about their next flick or what their vacation's gonna be like. They're in the moment, you know? I mean, I'm a veteran, but I'm still in the moment because I love what I do so much. And you know, and I love being in with emerging talent because it you see how you were when you started out. You know, the dreams are still there. They're so fresh. You know, because you're already thinking about, you know, your legacy or whatever. But they're just in this beautiful moment, and it's just beautiful to be there, especially with these incredible talents.
Great answer. Better than I could have hoped for, actually. And I did want to follow up before I move on one of the things you were saying, Barbie. And I've heard you say in other interviews how much you identified with the character. It didn't have to be literal biographical points, but there were just so many things you connected to. Can you talk maybe specifically about like the characteristics that kind of jumped out to you on screen about the character?
Yeah, so when I played Lily, I think a lot of it was about my inner child, and I think Tracie and I spoke a lot about it and kind of healing that inner child that is inside. So for me, that was at the forefront. Like all of her breakdowns, everything was just like the tiny child in her that has never gotten any sort of safety, any sort of love, any sort of like just stability or guidance in any way. And for me, I definitely relate to that. You know, I grew up without a father. I grew up a 21-year-old single mom in New York. You know, it was although it wasn't exactly the same, I felt that emptiness and that hurt when you have a parental figure who just decides not to be in your life, right? And then you spend a lot of time blaming yourself, even if you're not conscious of it. And I think that's something I talk to Tracie a lot about, is like, you know, my journey in therapy, where I was like 18 and just started going to therapy, and I was like, okay, I'm a mess. Obviously, this is my fault. What's wrong with me?
Don't we all do
Yeah,
that?
I was like, obviously, this is inherently horrible. I'm bad. You know, why? And I never even thought about my childhood in any way until I started doing therapy. So to me, it was very illuminating that, like, you know, for me, Lily was the embodiment of my inner child combined with, you know, the context and the background of a completely other person. But it just felt really emotionally just very there for me every time. And Lily and I could not be, obviously, we're very different, but it's like a part of me. I think whenever I'm looking for a new character, I want to explore these like little seedlings in my brain of like the emotions of that character. And so I just really connected with her in all aspects.
And having a scene partner, like John Leguizamo, is obviously quite an achievement. I mean, you've moved quickly, and you've had a very impressive career. And you've worked with a lot of up and coming actors in a lot of your breakout roles. So did it change your process working with such a seasoned actor? Did you approach the role differently?
Totally. I think what I was trying to do is like fake it till I make it in the confidence department. I've been doing that. Like I just did a play with like absolutely seasoned, like incredible theater actors, and I had never done professional theater, and I was also like just pretending like I was like yeah, now I got it. You know, so I think for me, I just wanted to make sure that the trust was there with him, and so I didn't want to like be like, you know, freaking out about it. But you know, it doesn't change my process per se, but I think it just made it so much more wonderful to work with someone who I've been watching for so long, and it felt kind of like this, like, you know, when I was a kid and I was doing theater, we would watch Moulin Rouge, and John was such an icon. I grew up in Queens, he's from Queens, you know what I mean? So it just felt like it was really
Queens in the house.
Queens in the house, baby. So to me, it was like, you know, I feel like it was just such a like a full circle moment that this was happening. And I always, you know, whenever I'm working with people who are legendary, which I've been literally I've been so privileged to do in the past like year or two, it's like I try to just like not make it their problem that I'm a newbie. To be honest, I'm trying to not make it their problem. So I try to just be overly prepared. I'm overly prepared all the time. And I just kind of try my best to just not get my nerves in, you know, not be lost in my nerves, which is hard, but
I just want to say that the moment you showed up in every single scene, she showed up, she was prepared, she was ready, she was open, you know, and that's, you know, I have really high expectations, and she exceeded every single one of them. So, and then, you know, the minute we sat down with rehearsal, you know, I prepare. I've been in a master class in LA for a long time to work with actors, and you know, even when you're not getting, you don't have a camera, you're prepping, you're like in training, you know, and I had these two incredible actors, and I'm like, okay, I'm prepared, let's rehearse. And I was like, it's magic. It's magic from the very first scene that we did together. So you know, I'm glad. I would never have known that you were nervous because you just showed up as yourself, and it was incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was very nervous. This was also like, I mean, this is the first time that I did a film that was so emotionally demanding. I did a movie right before this where I was number one on the call sheet, and it was a horror movie. And so I felt a little bit more prepared to be like, you know, if this was like the first time that I was like the main, like, you know, the number one girl, I would be really like, you know, for lack of a better word, shitting my pants. But it just, I think that it just gave me a little bit of a confidence where I'm like, I did it, I just did it. Like I could probably do this too, right? And thankfully we did.
Yeah, absolutely.
And it's such a gamble to cast roles that are deeply personal, I think. You know, it puts a lot of weight on the actors, but also, you know, as the person who wrote the script and is bringing the story, even before you got on set together, what was it about them specifically as actors that felt like they were the ones?
Oh my gosh. Well, so I didn't feel like, I still don't feel like I'm casting actors. You know, I'm casting hearts. All my projects, I'm casting hearts. And I don't feel like there's a long list of people that can play my characters. I feel like there's one person, and I find that one person. And sometimes you got to figure it out, but you get to that one person. And you know, and that's what it is. To me, that's really, really what casting is. And so I did that. We did that. I'm so happy. And I think, you know, I'd seen Barbie's vulnerability in Euphoria. You know, everybody had seen that. It was absolutely incredible. And it was the scene in season one, or towards the end of season one, where she's up top with Austin Abrams, you know, and she's saying, "I'm sorry." I don't know if I've even told you this.
No, you haven't.
Yeah. So she's up there at the top, and she's saying, "I'm sorry, I did all these things," you know, but this is why. And her voice is cracking, and you can feel this whole. It's like you're just saying this one thing, but it's so hard to say, and you're going through this maze to say it. And I'm like, "That's Lily. That's Lily right there. It's a little thing, but it's so hard, and we get it, and we all can relate." And so I videoed it with my phone. I sent it. I sent it to everybody. I said, "This is it. She's it." And I also looked at her, you know, childlike awe with Betty Who and Unpregnant, you know, and the ability to take like something that could be an everyday thing and make it magical, you know, this awe. It was just incredible. You don't usually get these two things in the same artist, the same filmmaker, the ability to be so vulnerable and so real and so like optimistic, but not because you're not aware of the darkness, you know, and so there's an awareness. So she is one of a kind, and it was just, it was a no-brainer, you know? And so now we get to John, and I don't know if I've told you all this either. So I of course, who doesn't? I mean, I think if you have a pulse and you have a little bit of a brain, you love John Leguizamo. You know, definitely if you have a heart, if you have a heart. And so I was obviously a fan, but it was his work in When They See Us, when he plays Raymond Santana Sr., and at negotiating all those different things in that character. It's so difficult. It's so much, but he was a father. You know, he's a father, and I was like, wow. I remember seeing that back in the, you know, it came out. I was like, so that's a father, you know. And then The Power, I was like, oh, that's a father, you know. And you're very busy, by the way. We're putting all this together, and you're like always busy. And then you know, because you're out shooting. Yeah. So
I gotta pay bills.
Yeah,
you know
yeah.
what I mean?
So, but then there was this interview, this sit-down interview, kind of like this, and you started talking about Latin history for dummies and why you did it. And why you wanted to arm your son with these tools, and you got choked up, and I got choked up watching, and I said, that's a dad, that's a father, that's somebody who understands family, and that heart is Bob Trevino, and that was it. And you know, I always loved you, but then there was like no undoing that once I saw you, you know. So I was like, I'll fly to New York, whatever I need to do, you know. So these two human beings are absolutely incredible, and they have two of the best hearts in the entire world. So.
Oh wow.
And so I'll make this my last question for me, and then I'll open it up, because so this is what I was saving. I don't know if it's as groundbreaking as to everyone else as I think it is, but I saw in the South by Southwest interview that you said that you watched specifically interviews of John because you wanted to make sure, like, you'd heard he was a kind person, but you really wanted to make sure because of how
My kindness is up for question.
debate, yes.
What do you mean? That's a bizarre thing.
And
That's how I roll. Yeah, this is
yeah, and apparently you watched a lot of interviews just to verify for yourself that this was
No one
definitely.
can lie in an interview. I mean,
Okay.
And I think you said, you know, I watched to see what he was like when the cameras weren't on him, and I love that concept of being so like purposeful with the people that you're casting, and anyone feel free to jump in, but I guess, you know, you very rarely hear that, and after doing this film, like, do you think that's a sustainable concept, like a sustainable way in this industry to like approach filmmaking?
I think it has to be a non-negotiable a little bit, you know, and you walk away from things if you can't get that, you know. Of course, people have trouble, you know. There's people that have trauma and they're reacting and they're having issues, you know. That's one thing. But if someone is cruel, like, and don't worry, I didn't think you were cruel. I never thought you were cruel. But if something, yeah. But if you find that, you know, that doesn't matter how big of a star they are. You know, they're not on my set, you know. Like the set is full of love. My stories are full of love. We have respect from the top down. From the highest person to, you know, the entry level people. Like, everybody is needed and everybody deserves to be respected and cared about.
But Tracie, not everybody's like you. Okay, I've been in this industry for 4 decades, and they're not like you, because a lot of people will buckle under pressure from studios that they want somebody else, not the person that a lot of directors come in. And a lot of directors buckle because they want their movie to be at a certain budget with a certain studio, and they don't fight for their first choices. A lot of people are insecure about their first choices. But you're strong enough somehow, I don't know how, but to be able to reject certain things. But a lot of people can't fight for what they want.
I think we're building a little family, you know, and the heart that you see in the film is all of us. It's not just me, it's all of us. And you have one person in there that makes everybody feel small, then that goes out the window. You know, this movie would not have affected you today, those of you that it did affect, if we hadn't had that set together.
But you know, a lot of directors don't have that.
they definitely don't.
Don't have
That is
that.
almost, you know, and it's crazy because the actors have this reputation of being kind of difficult. And in my short little career that I've had, I've actually only ever worked with people that were just absolutely wonderful. So it's actually, I don't feel like it's a completely rare thing.
Yeah.
I think you think it's rare because, you know, the
horror story.
stereotype of the actor, of course. But it's like, you know, I mean, in my like 7 years of acting, I've never really worked with someone who is like absolutely.
Oh, I have.
John, thanks.
I worked with a lot
John, I'm
of assholes,
sure.
a lot of divas, a
I'm
lot of people
sure.
who are impossible. And
We
I'm
won't
so
ask
glad
for
that you have
names.
that.
We
Well, I'll
need
give you names.
names.
I'll name names.
Like
I'll
Barbie
drop a name
Ferreira.
right now.
No.
Well, I feel like that's a good time to segue. All right, first hand up.
Do you want me to wait for Mike or?
Well, I can hand you my mic.
You
or-
won't
you're
be
loud,
loud.
you're loud,
You're
yeah.
good. You said it.
Well,
You
some
got
people
voice the
want the
theater.
mic. I'm not a divas, but I don't need the mic. But anyhow, now, John, for you, this is like not a frequent role to be cast as a father, you know, and for you, I don't know how many times you've been cast as a daughter. You've been cast as a young person, but not. So it was interesting to see, how did you guys work out between the two of you, defining the characters and how you were going to relate to each other? And then for you, I want to hear about how the other Bob, what you did to get the other Bob Trevino, because we had to have the contrast to really get the concept of the film.
I think
Yeah, good.
like me and John, I feel like, you know, there's like such an awkwardness, like a delightful awkwardness on the meeting. So I think that was just kind of,
Yeah.
it just
You don't
like,
want to really talk about that too much.
well, yeah, it just was like, you know, we were in these like silly situations,
Yeah.
and like when he's in the toilet and everything. So I think it was just keeping that
Yeah,
like
yeah.
awkwardness, curiosity of who this
Not to
person
plan
is.
it out too much.
But we also
yeah.
were very aware that we have an age difference, and the average story would maybe be a little bit more nefarious and like maybe go a different route. So it was also really important that we kept this like
Innocence. I mean,
very
yeah.
big innocence in it, because we did not want it to ever
Right.
read that way, and hopefully it didn't. So
Right, right.
okay, cool.
No, it couldn't read that way because it'd be a different movie.
It'd be a completely different movie, and
Yeah.
it wouldn't have worked. So,
Yeah.
you know, I think that was really just like keeping that that beautiful awkwardness of strangers and innocence and just just listening to each other. I mean, this is an indie, so we had 20 millions of locations.
I know, so
5
ambitious.
billion.
5 billion locations in was it 18 days? So you know,
20 locations.
I mean, we
18
plan
days.
our characters with Tracie,
yeah.
right? With really meticulously planning out, make sure that Bob was not seedy, that he was, you know, really pure about his intentions with Lily, and that of his loneliness and sadness. That was all planned. But then when we went together, it wasn't planned because you want that to be as spontaneous as
Yeah.
possible. So you plan where you can, and the other things you have to let go.
Yeah, if you know who you are as a character,
Yeah,
it's
it'll
great to
happen.
like when you have like such a strong foundation of what the character is. I'm very superstitious, and if it's like over rehearsed, I think it's gonna be bad on camera because I just think that like the spark is like gone. And so we had rehearsal, but we didn't ever like beat it over the head. Like we were like, okay, we have an idea of where it's gonna go. Let's see what happens.
Yeah, for real. That's what
Yeah.
keeps it electric and exciting.
Yeah. If you had for one moment, you know, it had a different tactic, the whole thing would go. You know, I remember when we met at Morandi. It was like the tactics to flirt and to charm out the window.
Right,
you know?
right.
Because if Bob Trevino, even for 1 second,
Yeah.
tries, you know, and I was like, you can only be funny on accident or a dad joke. That's
Yeah,
it.
yeah,
You know,
yeah,
which is
yeah.
very hard because he's
There's a
very
lot of
funny.
rules, there's a lot of rules.
Yeah.
You have to be swagless.
Yeah. Swagless. Okay.
So we might have to make the part 2 the last question. All right, let's make the part 2 the last
Yeah,
question, which was, will you repeat
The other
it?
Bob.
The other Bob. So how did we do that? Well, one thing I would say is that we were scheduled to shoot John and Barbie first, and we didn't have a lot of money. And I said, no, we have to fly French Stewart in, you know, because we have to rehearse. Barbie and French and I have to rehearse because she needs to know what it's like, this trauma and this horrible experience with the dad, so that she can appreciate the new dad. So it was like a little blow budget movie. I remember it was a big deal. We don't have that money. Fly him in and fly him back. Fly him in. And I was like, no, I'll figure it out some other way. We need this. So French came in. We rehearsed. And another thing is that I had them improv the highs because she's a survivor. She's not a doormat. She knows, you know, what she's going for. And if you have to believe in something good, if you're going to go for it for us to buy it, right? There has to have been some kind of good time with her dad at some point that she's trying to get back to. So French came in. Good highs and lows there, I think.
Yeah.
I would say he left, then we did theirs. But one thing with the dad is French Stewart and I, we would always say, you know, every villain is the hero of their own story, you know. And I was always on his side. Hurt people. These are things, and I never used the word narcissist with him, although I would use
Well,
it
you
now.
did behind.
Yeah.
Behind his back.
Now I would. Now I can. Now I'm not directing him. But we also learned there's no shortage of complicated fathers, you know, or narcissistic fathers. So we all had that to draw from. But yeah, it was really hard for him to be so mean to Barbie, you know. And
I thought it was hilarious.
Yeah.
He called me an unmade bed once, and I think about that all the time. That's the funniest insult I've ever heard.
at the buffet,
He's like, you changed. You got
That's
an unmade
nice. He
bed.
looked like an unmade bed. Yeah.
That was
But I had to
amazing.
cut that line because I was too funny, you know. But yeah, so just being on each character's side, I'm always trying to be on each character's side. So and I, you know, is inspired by my dad, and I just, you know, you have to have boundaries and let go, and you know, if everybody's a twisty villain, you know, with a mustache, then like what do we have? How can people change? And because I think we didn't completely villainize him, people are able to see themselves in him, which is where the power is. You know, I remember a guy in Seattle came up to me and he said, and he had wet eye, you know, his eyes were teary, and he couldn't look me in the eye. You know, a guy in his 60s or so, and he says, I can relate to the good Bob and the bad Bob, and I don't know which one I am. You know, and that's everything. And if we'd made him a caricature, that guy never would have seen himself in this character. So I think finding the humanity, not saying we don't need boundaries, you know, be very clear, but finding the humanity in the hurt people, I think is kind of key, you know.
Well, thank you everyone for joining us when we're around.